Welcome everyone to another episode of Data Dialogues. Data Dialogues is where we bring in leaders from the data space to talk about some of the most exciting topics in data. Again, this week we are trying a brand new format. We have Hamzah Chaudhary, CEO of Lightdash. Welcome, Hamzah.
Thanks, Tarush. Great to be here.
And we also have Rohan. Rohan is the director of analytics at Collectors. And Collectors are a very happy Lightdash customer. Welcome, Rohan.
Indeed, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is a very different format for us where we are actually trying something new. We have Hamzah here to sort of tell us more about Lightdash and how does Lightdash fit into the modern data stack world. But we also are trying a new format by having one of their customers to actually talk about very practical tips and use cases of how some of these tools work in the real world. So we're very, very excited about this new format. Hamzah, Rohan, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you so much for taking us taking us through your experiences. One of the things Hamzah obviously would want to start with is we're living in one of the most fragmented ecosystems in data. We have 35 plus BI tools out there. Why does Lightdash deserve to be on that? Why does Lightdash deserve to be a tool out there in the ecosystem?
35, that's it? Seems to me like it's... yeah.
Actually,
sorry to interrupt, but...
No, actually, if you go to G2, I think there's over 200.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but I think some of them count in like multiple categories. But I did open up Matt Turk's sort of state of data, and I opened up BI, and very traditional BI, this sort of about 35 tools. I sort of guessed that it didn't count exactly, but
Yeah,
in a very crowded ecosystem, why does Lightdash deserve to be one of these tools?
that's a good question. So, the short answer is Lightdash, and there's a short and a long answer. I'll give you both. The short answer is, Lightdash was really built for data teams who are trying to serve the rest of the company. And it's really built with that user profile in mind versus trying to be everything for kind of all people all in one. The longer answer to this is actually that the background for Lightdash comes from Oliver and myself, who's my co-founder. We started off as consultants, so we were building and managing data stacks for companies, and we found that the most successful way to get self-service to work was by having folks who are dedicated to enabling the rest of the organization. So in our case, that was analytics engineers. We were building and maintaining these semantic models of our data inside dbt or inside LookML, inside Looker. And then exposing that to an end user was a far more successful way of getting people to engage with data day to day. But what we thought was lacking was that there was no real tool that was specialized around that persona. So, this data person who's technical, who's command line savvy, who's working in VS Code and wants all the power of working like a software engineer to be able to kind of have that leverage for the rest of their company. And so against all good advice, we decided to, try and work on just one more BI tool that would fit into that crowded ecosystem. So that's kind of the basis, but probably the strongest reason for why I think Lightdash has to exist.
That makes a lot of sense. A tool for analytics engineers. A lot of people have been calling Lightdash open source Looker. How does, what do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, so when we launched on Hacker News, we gave ourselves like a really verbose title, and then somebody in one of the first comments put, "Oh, it's like open source Looker," and I thought that was a much more concise way of describing what we were doing. So we actually adopted that tagline for a while. They draw the similarity for good reason, because I kind of bucket BI tools into two categories, like ones that have a concept of sort of semantic metrics and ones that don't. Looker is probably the biggest tool that falls into that category of having this way of defining business metrics in a way that is, beyond just SQL that an end user can interact with without worrying about how it's calculated. So Lightdash is also in that category. And that's why people call us like open source Looker. If you look at most other tools, which are sort of like a pane of glass on top of your warehouse, but you're still running a SQL query, you have to define everything as SQL. And so like that's probably why I don't mind being labeled the open source Looker. That's okay. It's worked in our favor for now.
That's awesome. Has Looker ever reached out and in any way?
No, surprisingly not. We haven't. I haven't personally been reached out to by anyone from Looker. Not in an official capacity, at least. But maybe one day it's coming.
Does Looker still exist? Or
I mean, it's there. It's part of Google Cloud now, and there's a team there. But we haven't spoken to them.
We've spoken to a Looker rep recently, so I can confirm that it does exist.
Cool. Just checking.
So Rohan, I know, sort of, we have worked together not once but twice, and in both the companies we worked together, we used Looker. And obviously now, as you mentioned, you are a very happy Lightdash customer. Tell me more about the decision-making process. What were some of the vendors you were evaluating, and why was the Lightdash story most compelling?
Yeah, happy to talk through that process. So we were, at the beginning evaluating all the standard BI vendors, the big names that you would generally consider. So there was Looker, of course, having used it. I've been a user since 2015, right? So I was most comfortable myself with the tool. Also looked at Mode, Sigma, some of the newer tools out there like Preset. We had Tableau already, so we kind of considered keeping that as well. So that was kind of the ecosystem. But Lightdash, to be honest, was not on the radar at all. But somehow during that time when I started that evaluation, their seed funding news came out. So I was like, oh, there's this other tool that I had heard about like a year before from our former colleague, Michael Weinberg. Yeah. So he said, hey, keep an eye out on these guys. They're very early, but, might be interesting.
That's exactly how I heard of Lightdash too.
Yeah. He's a pioneer, man. So anyway, so that got Lightdash on our radar. And going through the evaluation process, what I at least found was this was way too complex for my liking, right? I found myself in these elongated sales cycles where 7 salespeople would be there gathering requirements and asking all kinds of questions about our plans for 2024. And really, I was like, hey, I know BI. I've done this before. Really, I want to just take your tool for a spin. I pretty much understand what our requirements are, so make this easy for me. So first and foremost, I would say Lightdash made it really easy for us because on the first call with Hamzah, he was just like, hey, why don't you take this for a 45-day free trial? We'll be there to support you. We'll have a shared Slack and we can see how it goes. So after considering all the vendors, we just found that we were aligned on this long free trial thing. Even though they were early stage, we thought, hey, we have a 45-day time period to try this out and take this risk, right? And at the time, I looked at it as a big risk. So I was looking to de-risk in any way possible. But in terms of the things that made it stand out from a feature perspective, going back to what Hamzah was saying about, if this can really 5x your developer productivity, then that can truly unlock something amazing for our company. So our developers were having a really tough time switching from DBT to Tableau, and that fragmented DevX was making them really slow, making their output untrustworthy, and this had the potential to create that one unfragmented kind of developer experience there. Additionally, cost-wise, Lightdash was a fraction of any of the other players, which were kind of treating us as enterprise. And plus the easy looker-like UI for data exploration for our end users. So those things combined kind of made it compelling to at least get us into the free trial.
Got it. And just for sort of context of everyone, can you just run us by some basic metrics? How big is collectors? How big is the data team? What is your data stack today? Approximately how many business users do you have? What are some of the sort of data volumes? Take us through your footprint today.
Yeah, sure thing. So a little bit about the company first of all. Collectors has been around for over 30 years in the collecting space. So we operate in coins, in sports cards, Pokemon cards, autographed sports memorabilia, a lot of interesting segments like that. Our biggest business by far is grading and authentication. So on a daily basis, we receive tens of thousands of items incoming to our facilities. They go through this whole physically operational process of unpackaging, quality checks, etc. until they're finally graded by experts, and that grade allows customers then to go and add this to their collection with the knowledge that, hey, I have this high quality item, or sell it and fetch the best price in the market. So that's our biggest business, but apart from that, we also have an auction house called Golden. We have a storage facility where you can securely store your collectibles, research, data aggregators, etc. So overall, Collectors is about a 2,000 person company. We have one central data team of 10 people. We have 2 data scientists. The rest of us pretty much work pretty end to end, from ingestion all the way to BI/analytics. In terms of stack for ingestion, we use Stitch and Hevo. We use BigQuery. We are heavy users of DBT, so we really take the time to model our data there, which is again something that makes Lightdash and its tight coupling with DBT an attractive choice for us. And then
enterprise or your own hosted DBT core?
We use the Teams plan, so we're somewhere in between. But yeah, we use pretty much all the features. All our orchestration is done today through DBT Cloud as well. And for BI, we have Lightdash, but we also have, being a company that's been around for 30 years, we have this legacy suite of SSRS reporting that we're currently migrating over, so the whole company can be on this unified platform.
Got it. And how about some of the additional categories like product analytics, reverse ETL, observability, governance? Are any of those sort of relevant today, or kind of what you spoke about is obviously what we call the core analytics stack: ingestion, storage, modeling, reporting?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have, so our central data team in this stage of the company has only been around for about 1.5 years, 2 years. So this is kind of a new function when we talk about what the modern data team looks like at Collectors. But we do have some of those tools in place at the moment. For product analytics, we do use Heap. And for reverse ETL, we use High Touch. We don't have anything on the observability front or governance at the moment.
Got it. Very interesting. Thank you for that. And sort of going back to Hamzah, Obviously Collector is a fairly large business in terms of 2,000 odd people. I know the Lightdash open source project gets traction and people go play around with it and they go deploy it. Very typically so far, what do you see in terms of your, you know, I won't call it ICP because ICP is more after who you're going after, but who is who is Lightdash's sort of typical customer today, and where did collectors fit into that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, collectors fits really well into exactly that category of kind of what a great customer looks like for us, both on like kind of what's useful to us as a business. Obviously we want to work with amazing companies. Collectors is just a really cool company. If anyone's interested in Pokemon cards or collectibles or even watch the Netflix documentary, it's exciting. But outside of that, I think it kind of fits the profile. We talked about folks who understand the developer workflow and have this need to want to have an outsized impact for the size of the team. So the example of the 10-person data team that's supporting 2,000 end users is exactly the kind of folks who see a lot of the benefit from like this kind of approach to kind of BI. Couple with that the fact that Rohan and his team had a lot of experience with previous BI tools, so they really knew what they wanted and kind of what they didn't want as well. And so in some respects that's kind of amazing. From our perspective, it was that's a really great position to be in because the company kind of knows what they want. But most of the time, most users I'd say that come to Lightdash tend to be folks who have used some of the major BI tools. Predominantly they come from the Power BI's, Tableau's, Lookers of the world. That tends to be the on-ramp, whether they're coming on open source or straight into the cloud.
Yeah. And who is Lightdash not for?
That's a really good question. I'd say for the kind of like the smallest sort of teams, or what I'd say is like if you're just starting out with data and analytics, then sometimes like a tool like Lightdash might be a little bit too heavyweight for kind of what you're looking for. Particularly if you think about when you're an early stage company and the things you really care about, you're going to get from out-of-the-box analytics tools, right? Like either product analytics, if you're using like Mixpanel or PostHog, or even just from Stripe analytics data. And really, you don't need anything more than that because you're chasing product market fit and you're trying to like stay alive as a company. At some point, that data becomes more useful to you to start pulling those levers. But at very, very early stages, I'd probably say like Lightdash might not be the perfect tool. There are exceptions. We have some small startups using it, but for the most part, I'd say it tends to be like the moving into a more mature data setup when Lightdash makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And, I think you have one of the most interesting pricing models where I think you're probably the only tool out there, the only tool I've seen, which sort of charges a flat license fee and has unlimited users. Walk us through that decision, and I think the important question is, do you think as the business scales and grows, is this something which you think you would change as you think about the future?
That's a good question. So where it came from was actually pretty straightforward. I think the user-based pricing model in BI, at least, it kind of has this weird effect of actually limiting the value of the product because and this came from my experience as a consultant where I was selling a lot of these BI tools or trying to get them bought on behalf of companies. And the biggest problem I had was trying to figure out like, hey, how many licenses are you going to need? Who needs to be an editor? Who needs to be a viewer? And then can we, negotiate who should be an editor because that's going to be too expensive. And if you zoom out, it just doesn't seem like the right way to sort of get the most out of your tool from a BI perspective. And not to say that there aren't other ways that you can charge for BI. I think you can, and that's the approach that Lightdash is taking. But we've always made it clear that you shouldn't limit people's access to data from a pricing perspective. It just doesn't seem like the right incentive. And what I'm saying, by the way, isn't that the pricing model of other companies is wrong. I think it's just that at the time it might have made sense, but I think for this kind of new world of data access that we're in at the moment and the kind of level that people expect, it doesn't make as much sense. It's it's less easy to kind of justify. For us in the future, the way that we think about it is that Lightdash, we want it to be connected into lots of places. We want people to be able to leverage their metrics, not just in our GUI interface in the UI, but via APIs into tools like Notion, into Confluence, all these sorts of places. We want to have it live and living there. And we think that there's like another sort of version of building data applications on top of tools like Lightdash that kind of exists that we want to go after. We think that will be a sort of a lever for growth in the future, but it won't be on per user pricing. So there won't be a renewal of your contract, Rohan, on per users next year. It isn't coming.
Very interesting.
Well, one quick story there. When we were at WeWork, Tarush, within a year, I mean, this is obviously a crazy case, but our company went from 2,000 to 16,000 people, right? And we were deploying Looker there when we were at the 2,000 stage. And our approach was, hey, everyone, see what you can do with data, right? You're starting a new business venture, we'll come and help you. You're optimizing operations on this existing thing, we'll come and help you there with Looker. And before you knew it, we had paid for 1,000 licenses, and now we have 14,000 people that we had given access to. And that renewal conversation the next year, I remember how challenging it was. There were a lot of dinners we had to go to with our reps to smooth that over. So it does create, it does put companies in strange positions sometimes, and that incentive that we get with unlimited users access is really key for us at Collectors as well.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on the nail on the head. I think you just this is not just for BI tools. I think any company in the world, when you think about pricing, ideally you want it to incentivize with the value your product provides. And I think, there are some tools for which user-based pricing that does work, like Slack as an example. The more users you get, the actual more value it gets, because it's all about sort of keeping people connected. With BI, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it becomes like a limiting factor, and actually the value people get out of it is the insights you create and how easy it is to share and put those in other places. And maybe per user pricing isn't necessarily the best way to capture that from like a vendor perspective, or buy it from a customer's perspective.
Yeah, I think we could spend the whole hour talking about pricing strategy, but I do want to go touch on a few other points. I think AI is something which obviously is one of the hottest topics, and we have brought in a bunch of leaders sort of going to talk about how AI enters the BI space. And one thing which people are sort of starting to talk about is sort of conversational AI on top of your metrics or on top of your semantic layer. And I think in regards to this conversation, this sort of touches on a few different interesting points, especially for Lightdash, is given your sort of very tight integration into the sort of semantic layer. I know you're currently built on sort of DBT. Is the long-term strategy to be built on top of the DBT on top of the DBT metrics layer, or sort of how does Lightdash think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought it was going to be an AI question, and then it pivoted into a semantic layer question. But
it is going into AI, but then just a few things to sort of touch on before we get into AI.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, I mean, from a semantic layer perspective, it's kind of worth understanding Lightdash's philosophy behind this. Like, we are really big believers in the sort of concept of a semantic layer. So the idea that you should have a single source of truth where you define these business metrics, revenue, weekly active user, whatever these things are that are unique to your business, they should be immutable and sort of stored in one place and accessible. When we started Lightdash, there weren't really any production grade semantic layers out there that we could access and build on top of. And so we built the first version of that directly inside DBT, and that still exists today. Over time, though, more and more semantic layers as a service are starting to be stood up. Probably the two most prominent one you mentioned, DBT's own proprietary DBT semantic layer, and then there's other third, vendors like Cube, for example, who have a semantic layer as well.
Are you talking about DBT's sort of deprecated semantic layer, or are you talking about Metrics Flow, the new one?
The new one, yeah. So Metric Flow, is the open source technology that powers DBT semantic layer, which is like the paid for product. So I think from our perspective, we always wanted Lightdash to be built on top of semantic layers, but we wanted to be as agnostic as possible over what those would be. So, the future for us would be that you can kind of tell us if you want to plug into a semantic layer of choice, like you kind of plug that in and Lightdash works on top of that. I think as a company, we're way more interested in where the rubber hits the road for the business in terms of the BI side of things. And we're a lot more flexible in terms of how opinionated people are about semantic layers and kind of where they should be stored and where they should be held. Which is why today, we kind of fully integrate with DBT's semantic layer, and we've kind of maintained that for as long as we've been able to.
Is there any upcoming timelines on other integrations? What do you think about Looker potentially opening up sort of LookML as a semantic layer? What are your thoughts over there?
I think it would be interesting. I think there inevitably has to be more players in the space, like there will be, and Looker could be a really interesting one. There's a lot of familiarity, right, with folks who've written LookML, so that could be a really nice win for them. In terms of timeline,
by the way, Malloy is an interesting one that Lloyd Tab is doing. I haven't looked into that, but super interesting.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to mention Malloy, who are basically like the folks who wrote LookML or created LookML, or building Malloy now. I think the timeline for us is we're pretty transparent. If folks request it, we'll build it. So as we get more demand for some of these other semantic layers, we will definitely build the integrations for them. We are also working on trying to build a more agnostic connections that it's just easier for any semantic layer to define, almost like an API, right? Like a reusable API. If these are the things that you need to have in a semantic layer to power the Lightdash experience, and then it becomes a much easier interface. But we definitely do want to integrate more. And
Rohan, I know you're heavily integrated into DBT. Do you use DBT semantic layer, or or at the moment you focus just on building DBT models and sort of using Lightdash on top of that?
It's a super interesting time for us in this regard. So we were actually early adopters of the deprecated DBT metrics. So we deployed that and had that kind of powering various parts of our business, where those metrics would, actually drive weekly business reviews and initiative meetings. So we really bought into the concept of the semantic layer. I think it's an interesting time for DBT currently with how they're going to price the new semantic layer. And so we're kind of trying to sit back and wait for a little bit more transparency there. From early conversations, it seems like our use cases might 5x, 10x our costs on DBT, and so that's not something we're willing to consider at the moment. But we do think this space will evolve a little bit. Super interested to see how it does. But I am a strong believer in having that semantic layer defined on top of your models that can then power your BI experiences or other data experiences. So very interested in this space.
You did touch on a sort of topic which I think has been a large undercurrent in sort of 2023, which is this topic of costs and pricing. And we're talking about Collector as a 2,000-year-old business, a sort of a 2,000 company business with a 30-year-old business, which is established. Very it's not a startup which is sort of which is going and looking for its next round of funding. A very established business. How important is in terms of the decision to make Lightdash? What was the cost considerations in terms of, if you had to weigh things on, a scale of 1%, which is relatively which is not important at all, to 100%, what was the cost consideration of sort of Lightdash in this case, probably being on the cheaper end of things, probably closer to something like a preset or some of the other sort of open source as compared to the Tableaus and Sigmas and Power, and sort of as compared to the sort of Tableaus and the Blurs and Sigmas?
Yeah. So the way I looked at it, we already had Tableau kind of deployed at the company, right? So we were already paying that Tableau level of pricing, and therefore we could have implemented a mode, a looker, a sigma at a similar level, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been too big of an issue. And preset actually also has a user-based kind of pricing model, so Lightdash is an anomaly in terms of pricing.
Got it.
So the way I looked at that is, hey, we're a pretty early data company trying to demonstrate value here, right? And if we can deploy a tool that supercharges our developers while at the same time saving so much in cost that we can justify adding developers as opposed to paying this exorbitant price for a BI tool in this frankly overcomplicated space, that adds tremendous value for us. So I wouldn't say initially it was this directive that, hey, you know, BI costs are ballooning and you have to do something about this, but it was more about we should, as a team trying to demonstrate its value at the company, keep that in mind and find the fastest time to value that we can, and maximize that ROI for our team.
Yeah. Talking about ROI and sort of going back into the AI world, I think one of the things which I'm probably most excited about is the concept of, the concept of conversational BI. And for those of you who don't know what that really implies, but it's the promise of being able to ask, either through text, either through an interface like Slack or Teams, or even through audio, being able to ask your data or ask an AI for answers into your data. What was last month's MRR? What was churn? Is this churn sort of statistically significant? What are some of the channels? Are they going up? Are they going down? What should we go focus on? And it turns out that a lot of BI as we know it is actually really well structured, built on top of a semantic layer to be able to go plug an LLM on top of it and sort of answer these questions. And I know there are sort of a bunch of companies out there doing it, from big companies to sort of new startups. The fear over here is sort of conversational AI does sort of, in some ways, threaten a big part of traditional BI, which has been about reporting and slicing and dicing and sort of graphs and visualizations and tables and alerts and emails and all of this. This sort of question to both of you, and Hamzah, would love to hear from you first. What is sort of conversational BI in regards to sort of Lightdash? Is there something on your roadmap around it? And how do you look at the fear? And then Rohan, afterwards would love to hear from you as you're talking about value for teams and being able to really empower the business. How do you see it?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. I think so. Yeah, like we're kind of similar. We're extremely excited by the prospect. Like I think there's lots of interesting use cases, but I also think it's worth understanding the details are important. So when we talk about conversational BI, I think what people immediately jump to is end users, right? So like having the end users of your company be able to ask questions and get answers back, and there's no interruption in the middle, right? Like no intermediation, no data people involved. And I think that state is much harder to achieve, not because, not necessarily because the AI or whatever isn't good enough, but because there's a lot of intricacy in a simple question. If I ask you how much revenue did we make last week, do you mean like the last 7 days or the last business week? And when you say revenue, which channels are you referring to? What do we? And so there's actually a lot of that stuff sort of caught up in there. And more often than not, what end users are actually looking for is not a answer to a question, it's the right answer to a question. And to get the right answer, that's normally why you have data teams, because they're there to sense check and help make sure that what you're about to put in that board deck is correct. So I think it's very easy to get an answer, and then it's a lot harder to make sure that answer is correct. So I think from our perspective, it's more not about like, do we throw a chatbot into Lightdash and just let it loose? It's more like, what's the product like user experience we need to design, which enables both things to happen. Like an end user can get questions, but at the same time, there is some sort of system in place where if you need it, there is the ability for a human, someone from the data team to be able to intervene and give you that sort of like, confidence that you need to be able to use the data effectively. That's like one side of it. I think the other thing that it's even much more real, that will be available much sooner than that, is the idea of like functions that help the data team be even faster. So we talked about leverage for data developers, and I think on the side of everything from writing DBT models, defining metrics, building charts and dashboards, if you know your way around the data already and you're looking for something to just supercharge your ability to do that, I think that is something that can already be like a much, much better experience. So like tools that help data builders build faster, I think like that I'm extremely excited about and very bullish on. And I think the other one is it's coming, but there's like more considerations to be had with it than I think people realize.
Yeah. Doesn't the promise of the semantic layer in some ways, simplify this concept of what does revenue mean? And again, what is last week? And, do we look at it from the week definition? Do we look at it from, the sort of Monday to Sunday definition?
Yeah. I think it does. I think it does a lot of it. I'll put it. It's the best chance we have. I think if you look at the previous version of text to SQL, that was just really hard, never accurate. It was really, really difficult. So building on top of the semantic layer is the best shot that we've got at definitely making this conversational aspect of it work for sure. And we're definitely working closely. There are companies that have actually built on top of Lightdash already that provide this sort of conversational experience, and some of them are really impressive. Both in the accuracy, the recall of the products.
Anyone you want to call out?
Yeah, so there's a company called Delphi that you might have already heard of, and if you haven't, you should check them out. So they've been built on top of, they use Lightdash's semantic layer internally, and they sort of integrate with us quite natively. And I think it's pretty impressive. But like, I still think there's a human element to it, which is harder to overcome, which is people still want to know that, hey, like, is this definitely like 100% right? Like, should I send this over to like Rohan and his team just to double check? And I think that's the bit that we need to fix. And that's like a product problem as much as it is like an AI problem. It's like a product UX problem.
We actually had David from Delphi and Ahmed from Narrator in episode 2, and they were talking about sort of Delphi and Narrator. But Hamzah, that makes a ton of sense. What I hear is you're more bullish on actual AI workflows to help data creators build faster, and you think that's going to be the first step. Rohan, as one of those data creators, what are your thoughts on the use cases for end consumers versus making this sort of data team's life easier, and sort of where has AI sort of really entered the workspace? Because something we hear from a lot of our data teams is they are under tremendous amount of pressure to go figure out how does AI integrate into a company's footprint. So would sort of love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. That is certainly something that resonates with things I've heard at the company. So I can give you a few examples there. In terms of my thoughts on the trends in the industry, I would kind of echo what Hamzah said. So the success that we've seen is in the code gen element, where I know developers on my team are going out there and trying to generate snippets of code, even DBT code, using things like ChatGPT, things like that. And they have seen some success there, even though it doesn't quite get you 100% there. Maybe it gets you 90% of the way there and save you like 45 minutes.
What's happening to productivity? Have your devs become sort of 1.5x more productive?
I don't know if I would put a number on that just yet. I haven't seen anything super noticeable to say, whoa, you finished this ticket in like 3 seconds. But I personally presented a demo where I used an LLM to get me a code snippet for a slightly complex SQL routine, and it was pretty cool. I did have to debug it a bunch, but you can see that there is some value there.
Finishing like 50% faster and then just going to get gelato, or this is
Well, that's the interesting question there. I think personally it's not quite there yet to say, hey, this has saved you 25% time, but you can see the promise in that element. From an end user perspective, to answer your question, is there excitement or a push at the company to adopt AI? I wouldn't say there's a push, but there is definitely excitement, right? Globally, there's so much excitement and hype about OpenAI, LLMs, all that stuff, and that definitely filters its way into corporate culture. So a couple of people on my team did this hackathon project a month ago where they tried to do this conversational BI thing and build that in-house. And it frankly did not work well, but you could see from the excitement during the presentation, everyone was like, hey, we need to invest. When can you fix all these issues? And I was just like, whoa. Let's slow this down a bit for the reasons that Hamzah mentioned, right? It's kind of garbage in, garbage out, and there's a ton of nuance there. One precursor to having effective conversational BI is the semantic layer, and we're so early in that semantic layer journey at this time, right? So I would argue with something you said earlier where BI today, I would say, is not necessarily in the best semantic layer form to give conversational BI that effectiveness that we need. But that is evolving with those tools that are coming up, whether that's Cube, DBT, semantic layer, Malloy, whatever it might be. So we're heading in that journey, and I'm personally more interested in that semantic layer, in that data modeling piece, in developer productivity than the end consumer at this time.
Got it. So, what I hear from you is that, the sort of semantic layer investment has to come, but you're not overly over the moon, and, from what you've seen in terms of the data team efficiencies, in terms of some of this AI, in terms of sort of auto-generating some of these queries, or sort of potentially even auto-generating some of these dashboards.
Yeah, that's right. I think code gen and code snippets, there is promise there, and it may have saved an hour or two here or there for people, but it hasn't really demonstrated something super concrete where we are consistently 50% faster in producing output. I wouldn't say that's quite yet.
That makes a ton of sense, and again, very early stages of all of this, right? Especially as it makes its way into the data ecosystem. I think we're almost out of time. So one of the things I really love doing is getting predictions for next year, which a year later, which we can review and see how wrong we all were. But as we think about 2024, and Rohan, would love for you to start this one, what are 3 predictions, and this could be very sort of focused on what do you want to see happens in the world of data infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can't wait to look at this a year from now. But I'll say first and foremost, something that we touched on, evolution of the semantic layer and the space, right? I'm super excited to see where we go, what companies enter the space, how DBT treats its position as the leader in that space at this time, and whether... Sorry, go ahead.
I want a prediction there on a scale of 1 to 10. How is DBT gonna how's DBT gonna do with that deployment of metric flow? 10 being absolutely knock it out of the park, cube whom, versus 1 being it didn't go according to plan.
Yeah, my prediction is that the product is going to be amazing, and the pricing considerations around it will raise a lot of scrutiny, outrage, and give other players in the space a chance to gain some adoption. So unfortunately, that's my prediction there from what I've seen with DBT's pricing at this time.
General adoption of it, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think it's going to be a year from now?
I would say 20% of data teams will at least be POCing a semantic layer. So at the end of the bottom line here is, I think a year from now, we'll have more questions than answers, but we'll at least start to see at Coalesce somebody presenting, oh, I deployed this with semantic layer and this is what it looks like. And interesting ideas starting to come up.
Like, today, probably arguably 0% of like semantic layer is on, a very, very small percentage on DBT's new semantic layer because it hasn't really rolled out. What percentage of companies do you think will be on DBT, on metric flow, as you think about this time next year? Compared to all the companies on semantic layer, this could be Cube or Malloy versus DBT metric flow. What percentage do you think will be on the new semantic layer?
Sorry, was this one for me?
Yeah. Just sort of zooming more into.
Yeah, I'll say teams that already use DBT.
Yeah.
I'll say 20% will at least try out the semantic layer to see if the pricing works for them, if the product works for them, and then I'll say 5% end up like actually using it and paying the price that comes with it. Yeah, let's go with that.
What is your second prediction?
My second prediction is that conversational BI doesn't work yet at the end of 2024. People try it out. It's not the greatest experience.
Yeah.
But we continue to learn and evolve, and there's promise there.
Third?
Third, I'll say data modeling continues to be a centerpiece of the discussion and continues to be the hardest problem to solve, which means that analytics engineers are not going anywhere, right? Creation of the data models that power this semantic layer. The semantic layer today is in the mind of your, best data engineer or analyst. And that's the big problem that we're trying to solve. And my third prediction is we continue to wrestle with that problem. And that is still the hardest problem to solve, is creating the quality input that will, in the future, get you the best output from AI.
Yeah. Amazing. Three predictions from Rohan. Data modeling is as relevant as ever. Conversational BI is a hoax, and semantic.
I wouldn't say a hoax, but not there yet. Not there quite yet.
Conversational BI yet, and semantic layer is going to start to gain adoption, but probably leave more questions unanswered than answered. Hamzah, over to you. What is happening?
Cool. Okay.
2024.
Yeah. So I think the first prediction is, for me, that data developer tooling will become like a much bigger category. So I think you're going to start seeing everything from standalone IDEs to CI/CD platforms catered to this sort of data developer persona. Right now we repurpose a lot of software engineering tools and they work really well, but I think we'll start to see a lot more tools that are purpose built for the data use case. I think that's probably, I'd say that's one prediction. It'd either be purpose-built or you're going to see those software tools building flavors of their tools that are catered at data teams.
And we already kind of see that with Count and with sort of Hex and some of these other sort of data collaboration tools, right? Like all of a sudden they've become, are they an entire category which they can go justify six-figure, sort of ACVs? So yet to be seen.
Yeah.
And it's something which
Paradigm is in there as well, an interesting one.
Yeah, I think so. I think that group of folks who fall into that bucket is just getting so much bigger. These folks who are sort of SQL savvy, Python dangerous. I like to describe them sometimes, and like that group of folks is just getting very powerful, and the requests on those people is starting to look a lot more like what we ask software engineers to do.
Yeah.
But the tooling hasn't caught up yet to the tasks that they're being given, and so I think that's going to change in 2024. I think that's prediction number one. Maybe prediction number two, like kind of the I guess the inverse of Rohan's one on the AI side. I think that while conversational BI might not be here, I think those AI productivity tools for sort of developers and builders are going to really come into their own. And so I think they're going to be just baked in a lot more into our workflows. Things like GitHub Copilot, just living much more natively. It just means anything to do with boilerplate is going to be gone. It's going to be a dream because we're just going to have to focus on the tough bit of analytics engineering and not worry about all the boilerplate code and things that we're writing and shipping constantly. And hopefully Lightdash will have a part in that, but that's gives you a little sneak peek of the roadmap. But yeah, that's the second prediction.
Yeah.
Maybe the third one for me it's probably around open source. I think that like open source is going to continue to get a lot more important for companies. I think some people asked this question last weekend, right after OpenAI, which is like, hey, like, do we need like more control over having open source technologies when we're entering this like brave new world? And I think that's going to be just more and more important for companies that ship with communities, that build with transparency. I think that's becoming the norm for a lot of expectations when you're working with vendors, and I think open source lends itself really well to that. And so I think open source is definitely here to stay, and it's I think it's only going to get bigger.
I'll add a prediction there. I'm going to say somebody forks DBT core and tries to run with it, and things get interesting. Let's add that in.
How about
the spicy take at the end? I like
projects is DBT and metrics flow is a separate project. Are they going to?
Right. I say metric flow is its own like proprietary paid product. I'd say for now somebody runs with DBT core and tries to build in, let's say, a more open source version of the semantic layer as well, where the pricing isn't prohibitive for anyone, right? And that competes really well with existing users of DBT, where they get this semantic layer for free as well. So someone listening to this, go out there.
It's like $10 and the fork is called Collectors DBT.
We're working on this. There's my team's right here working on it right now.
Amazing, everyone. I think we're out of time, but it was such a cool episode, and I really enjoyed this whole having a vendor Lightdash, which is soon going to be on the 5x ecosystem, as well as a customer really taking us through the unique perspectives of the sort of vendor customer. And I'm really, really excited about this new format, and I think we're going to do a lot more of it. So thank you so much for being on the first episode of this, and it's going to be out very soon.
Awesome. This was fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us, Tarush. It's been great.